Hi, welcome to the New Voting Project. My name is Kanal, your host, and today we have some very special guests joining us on the show. We have Madison Mandell, who we've had before, so thank you so much for coming back.
Sure.
She's the co-founder of Brown Votes and a fellow at Swearer Center for Civic Engagement at Brown University. You're also a student there, almost about to graduate, so congratulations-ish. And we also have Scott Warren, who is the co-founder and former CEO of Generation Citizen, which he started his senior year at Brown. So you guys are both representing Brown University. And you're also the author of Generation Citizen, The Power of Youth in Politics. Thank you so much for joining us. I believe we're going to be talking about some special things you guys have been working on for the past couple months. So thank you for taking the time. I can understand you both are very busy, so I appreciate it.
Excited to be here. Thanks so much for having us.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back.
Yes. No, I always welcome anybody back. That's great. So let's get into these questions. Just for our viewers, talk a little bit about your background. How you got working together, where you're at right now, and why you're working together. What's kind of the project that you guys are about to release?
Yeah, so I can start and really appreciate the work that you're doing, Kunal, and so appreciative to you for having us. So, as you said in the intro, my senior year at Brown, I co-founded an organization called Generation Citizen, which is all about working with young people to empower them to be active and engaged citizens through getting civics back in the classroom and making it experiential and action oriented. So civics, as I'm sure you all are aware of and listeners are aware of, it's not something that's typically taught in American, especially secondary school classrooms anymore. And when it is, it's the most boring class. Here's three branches of government. Here's how a bill becomes a law. And so Generation Citizen was really started with the goal of how do we transform civics? How do we get it to be the most vibrant, exciting class in school? And the way that we do that is through an approach we call action civics, where young people learn politics through actually doing politics, through taking action on local issues that they care about. So I started that my senior year at Brown, and I always cared about democracy issues, had always cared about the power and potential of young people taking action through some activism that I had done while I was at Brown. And for about 10 years, helped expand Generation Citizen to become one of the preeminent civic education organizations in the country. We have offices in New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, Texas, California, and work with educators across those areas. But I made the decision to transition on from the CEO role and step down about a year ago. It's the only thing I had done professionally, and wanted to look into different areas. Sort of expand my own repertoire. And one of the areas that I really wanted to think about was this intersection of higher education and democratic engagement too, which is, I think, getting more space. Generation Citizen was squarely in the in sort of middle and high school level, but starting to think about, where can higher education play a role too. So now my role is I'm at Johns Hopkins as a new institute focused on democracy called the SNF Agora Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started there, they said, we actually want to understand, what is Hopkins doing well about democratic engagement? How are we actually promoting democracy, and how can we be doing a better job? And so through part of that work, started realizing, let's do an audit and figure out what universities across the country are doing well, so that we can pull from those best practices. Because I was still active at Brown, I got connected to Madison as one of the preeminent student leaders in the country, focusing on student voting and focusing on how universities can promote democracy through within. And so we got connected, and Madison can talk a little bit more about that. But that was sort of the nexus of how I came to this report, and how I got to meet Madison as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'll let you go.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was a pretty good summary, but from my side of things, I co-founded, along with Kimberly Collins, Brown Votes, which is kind of our institution's democratic engagement initiative. And we noticed like a very sort of we noticed some very disappointing results in terms of voter turnout and voter registration. especially in the 2018 midterms. And we really wanted to see a change. And we noticed that there really wasn't any sort of institutional structure to really facilitate that work. So we came together, we worked with the Swearer Center, and we kind of put together Brown Votes. And we started off with a very sort of voting focus, but then it expanded beyond that to kind of democratic engagement at large. And that's kind of where, through those experiences, as a founder of an initiative like this, there was a lot of learning that I had to do on the go, and there was just so much information. And I kind of felt like there was like a lack of, lack of sort of support in some areas for that. And it kind of led me to, working with Scott and wanting to understand the space a little bit better and put out something that was useful for other individuals in the space.
Right. And I'm really glad you did so. And I want to go straight into the report, and just kind of because it's called Building Democratic Campuses, assessing best practices in democratic practice in higher education. So we're looking at college and universities, right? And how campuses are taking action when it comes to civic engagement, and making sure folks are voting. And I just want to ask, what inspired such a report? Because it's pretty in depth. I mean, you talk about several initiatives that different college campuses are doing, comparing and contrasting them. I mean, how long did this take? What inspired such a willingness to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the aspects of this report that I hope is unique, and I say this, with all admiration to all the people that have been in this space for a while, especially in the voting work, is we're trying to be comprehensive. So I think when I see, a lot of universities think about voting, and to be honest, I think a lot of, and I was in touch with some of them, but post 2016, there are a lot of universities that said, "Oh, we need to do more about democracy." And I think that for the last few decades, higher education, for a lot of different reasons, but it sort of veered away from their historical purpose of educating for engaged citizenship, right? I remember there's actually the president of the Carnegie Corporation, which is a foundation, the late Martin Gregorian, who was a president at Brown as well. I was at a session with him a few years ago, and he said, the problem is that higher education has become HIRE education. And what he meant by that was that colleges have been forced to really focus on how are we ensuring that our graduates are as employable as possible and can make as much money as possible. And I think that's really important. I mean, too many college students are graduating with tremendous amounts of debt and need to be able to make a good salary in a very uncertain economy, but universities have gotten away from that mission of educating for responsible and engaged citizenship. And so this report really tackles it, I think, from a comprehensive level. So voting is important, but not the only thing, right? And so we actually look at 6 different categories. We talk about a culture of democratic engagement. How is a university really building that culture throughout its student body, throughout its faculty? We talk about academic integration. How are students actually getting coursework that teaches them what it means to live in a democracy too? We do talk about voting. How do universities really promote voter participation, registration, and engagement in a comprehensive way? And then we talk about institutionalization. So how is this something that's not dependent on star students like Madison, but is sustainable beyond that? So it's actually baked into the university. We talk about partnership and coalition building, especially at the local level. So how are universities working with local communities? And then we talk about accessibility. So how can this be something that's, not just available for select students, but is available for the whole student body? And so, but I think it goes back to, we started this report because of what I said. I believe passionately that, the goal of higher education should be informed and engaged citizenship. But, and Madison can talk a little bit about the process, but it probably took about a year, soup to nuts, a lot of interviews, a lot of going back and forth, a lot of, figuring out where we needed to add information in. But yeah, Madison, I'll let you add in more.
No, that's a really good, that's kind of like from the theoretical perspective, what we were really trying to do. And also just kind of, from a practical perspective, like I was saying, there really aren't, there are probably there are tons of resources about sort of getting engaged in this space, but I think they're so kind of scattered and it's hard to glean a lot from everything. So we kind of wanted to provide, a holistic and comprehensive resource in one place. that kind of was able to highlight all this amazing innovation that's happening. And like a lot of times this work is happening in a vacuum on, particular campuses. And we thought that that deserved to be spotlighted and shared. Idea exchange is always helpful for growth in like any space, and in this space too. And one of the things we obviously realized that, every campus is different and you can't really provide sort of one size fits all solutions. But we did want to provide an array of different solutions that come from really diverse types of campuses as well, as best we could, so that people could adapt them to kind of fit their own environments. So part of the reason it took a long time was because we conducted interviews with, students, administrators, people sort of like involved in the democratic engagement space at institutions, organizations that do this work on like a national level, like the Campus Vote Project. They were really helpful, instrumental, and I'm actually a student advisory board member there, and they were instrumental in sort of connecting us to other campuses and students to interview. And yeah, basically that was the process, just a lot of interviews. And it was really nice because people would connect us to other people that they thought would be good to talk to. And again, like this is really a snapshot and just kind of the beginning and scratching the surface of this. You can't, in an ideal world, we would have hundreds of other interviews to include as well. But I think this does show that like this is potentially like a good way to go about spreading more information, and hopefully like similar reviews can be done with other campuses and more diverse types of campuses as well.
Yeah. So just a couple thoughts there. First of all, wow, that's dedication. So great job. No, I mean that sounds like a lot of painstaking effort to spend a year, researching, how, maybe hundreds of college campuses are dealing with this challenge. And my initial thought, and I think we touched upon this the first time we spoke, Madison, was that I was disappointed that higher education institutions weren't placing this. You'd expect a place like that where a liberal thought is, and college students are so active, and many of them want to be politically active, especially in the groups that I'm in. But you would expect those opportunities to be there and the accessibility to be there, but they're not. And so I think that's what I really want to stress, is that even in places we'd assume where democratic engagement is peaking, it's not. And there are always opportunities to get involved. And I think that's what the report really culminates and becomes that kind of symbol of, we all still need to work together to help solve the challenges we're facing. And along those lines, I want to ask, you spent a year making this report, and it's obviously very well written. I'm going to link it in the description. Viewers, please take a look at what campuses are doing, especially if you're a high school student about to be, a college freshman. What were some of the key takeaways you found? What were the similarities? What were the differences? How were some colleges reacting? Was it location-based? Was it environment? Was it student-driven? Or did administration play a larger role? What were the things that you found that you think other college campuses can and should be doing better?
Yeah, I think one of the advantages to this report is we just got a lot of different data from a lot of diverse institutions. And so we were careful, and Madison did a great job of this, of not just looking at the typical players and not just looking at the Ivy Leagues, but looking at universities across the country. The universities that seem to be doing this well, it's intentionality, and it's putting resources behind it too. It's not just sort of saying we're going to have a few events here, or we're just going to do a really good job with voting, or we're just going to do a good job with an event series, but really being comprehensive about it and saying we're going to make this a part of our culture. And so I think that became something that we saw different universities. James Madison University specifically had a local dialogue series with elected officials. They also did this thing where they sort of replicated the notion of public squares. And so, the Athenians using public squares to have debates. And so they would put that in the main area of campus where students would pose a question and have the opportunity to actually respond to it. And so, like, you see this is like James Madison is really trying to create a culture of civic engagement as well. Another thing that I think is really important, and this sort of goes to the accessibility piece, but universities really need to focus on on students that are less likely to engage democratically. And so there's been a lot of research out there that shows that students in the humanities tend to be more engaged than students in STEM. And I think, one of the things that we realize is that it's not just about, sort of going into STEM classes and saying, hey, go register to vote, but meeting them where they're at. And so, for example, Arizona State University hosted a Hack for Democracy. So it's a hackathon where students can talk about solving for democracy through a technological lens. So really thinking about things like that too. So Madison can talk more about that and maybe some of the voting initiatives that are happening. But I think what we saw is that one, like there's no university that's figured this out, but also we don't need to look to like the usual suspects. And we're both from Brown, obviously, and Brown's done some things well, but has a lot to be desired too. And that it really has to be something that's comprehensive and wide ranging. It can't just be like, oh, it's 2 months from a federal election, so we're going to put time and energy into this.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think one of the big sort of like differentiators is our institutions that do the work year round rather than just leading up to an election. Because again, like this work does have to be year round because again, it is more than voting, but also you have to be, even when it comes to just focusing on voting, like that preparation has to start at least semester or two before. But ideally there would be systems where, it's very organized and consistent. And, obviously like adapting to the times and everything, but once that system's in place, that kind of enables institutions to think beyond voting and work on sort of initiatives like we heard at like James Madison and Arizona and other institutions that go beyond that. But in terms of like voting and some and best practices in that sense that we have seen is when registration is really integrated into university systems. So whether that be when people are sort of like registering to enroll, or if it's linked to course registration, it's very important that that's at the forefront and an option given to students. Obviously not every student can vote, and you can't force every student to vote or to register, but just having that kind of in as an option that's linked to sort of university systems has been proven really helpful. And like a focus on turnout as well, because there are gaps between registration rates and turnout rates. So just registering people isn't enough. And I think like related to that is sort of one thing that is really emerging right now is like a focus on local elections in particular. Because, I think if you really teach people and train people to understand like how to participate in a local election, like that's a lot more, manageable and tangible. And those skills can translate into other elections as well. But it's also really important that people have an understanding of the communities that they're in order to be like a responsible participant. So we talk a lot about like responsibility and themes like that in this report, because a lot of times you see people just encouraging people to turn out in local elections, but people don't have the proper resources or context to understand and to participate in an engaged way. And part of that is sort of like collaboration with these amazing organizations in communities that are already doing wonderful work. There are a lot of times like coalitions in local communities, and I think that universities or student initiatives that kind of like partner with those is a really effective tactic, and we saw that across the board. Another sort of like a little bit more general point is you ask kind of who like spearheads the efforts and what's most effective, and I think it always has to be a combination between students and administrators, because like a lot of the work does have to be institutionalized. Mm-hmm. But again, like students are the ones that understand the campus in a different way than administrators can, and they're the ones actually participating that we're trying to turn out to vote and everything. So it has to be really student involved as well. And yeah, I think those are some of like the key points that we took away.
No, I think that's great, especially the point on local elections. I'm an advocate for them. I campaign in them. So if it's to go beyond the just registering to vote or voting, I would also encourage just getting involved. If you love an issue, go become issue driven. Look at the propositions that are coming up in the ballot box. If you love a candidate who are supporting X, Y, and Z issue, go and support them. Go campaign. Go volunteer. That's one step further than just voting. And I think we talked about the last time we spoke, Madison, is that I like that, that extra step that somebody takes to be super involved. But not everybody, to each their own, like I say. But no, that's absolutely great, and I really thank you both for publishing a report that's so, like you said, comprehensive and really gives a bird's eye view of how things are going in the world of college campuses and higher education. So thank you so much. And I want to move on, kind of go into the little bit more theoretical space on just voting rights. The channel is the New Voting Project, so we have to talk about something new. Um, I think one of the ways to increase civic engagement is to lower the voting age. It's at 18 right now. I'll be voting in my first election in this year. My birthday's in a couple days. Shout out to me. Um, but if I was 16 and still is involved, and I was reading, I was just talking, I was everywhere at that point. I didn't have much to worry about. I would have loved to vote. So I want to ask you both: should 16-year-olds, should younger people than 18 be allowed to vote and enter the political system and participate, and why?
We haven't talked about this, so I'm curious what Madison says. But I mean, I firmly, believe and support lowering the voting age to 16. So when I was a Generation Citizen, we actually helped start or did start Vote 16 USA, which is the national clearinghouse for lowering the voting age in the country. And we did it at Generation Citizen because we thought it would be an effective way to actually promote effective civics education, right? And so if 16 and 17-year-olds could vote, if you could vote while you're still in high school, then high schoolers would be incentivized to actually teach politics too. But there's been just a lot of studies and reports. I think, and it's interesting because we're talking about higher education, but to make a linkage here, I don't know if 18 is the best age to start voting at, because students are either in college and they, or they're working and they might not be thinking about voting. And I think there's some challenge of like, well, where do I vote? Do I vote in college? Do I vote? I'm sure Madison deals with this all the time. If 16 and 17-year-olds had already voted in a local election, you'd be starting that habit, right? So you'd be starting that habit earlier on, especially in local elections. And so it would just be like, you get to college and it's like, yeah, I voted last time, and so I vote next time. It just makes sense. I also think that there's a lot of issues right now that disproportionately affect young people that they don't have a voice on. Issues like climate change, the fact that the youngest generations are going to suffer the impact of older generations not taking action, means that young people should get more of a voice in terms of what actually happens. If you look at studies from around the world, there's a lot of countries that have actually already done this, and we're putting a network together of some of these countries. But you look at Austria, they've lowered the voting age. Argentina and Ecuador have lowered the voting age. Germany, the new German government that just came to power last month, as one of their staples, says that they're going to lower the voting age to 16 in all of Germany. So this is not like just a random reform, but it's something that's gaining traction. There's just a few cities in Maryland in the US that allow for 16-year-olds to vote in local elections right now. And we had some campaigns in San Francisco and DC that almost passed but didn't. But I think it's getting more traction. I think it makes a lot of sense. But people need to get beyond the gut instinct of 16-year-olds don't know anything, how can they vote? And I think that is part of broader symptoms. But yeah, curious to get Madison's take on it as well.
Yeah, I agree that that's a very bad argument that 16-year-olds don't know, because it's there are so many uninformed voters of every age. So I mean, it's really not about age. It's about resources and people's willingness to go out and educate themselves as well. But I agree that it's a really big problem, actually, people coming in and not knowing whether they can even register in the state that they attend. If they're going to college in a different state than their hometown, that's always what Scott was saying is a big issue. Right. And also elections are happening sort of immediately in the fall, right? So when you're a freshman and you come onto campus, a lot of the deadlines come up within weeks of you first enrolling. So a lot of people miss those deadlines, and you actually see in the data the lowest rates usually are the first years voting. So I think that's a big thing. And I think habit building is really important, because there's been a lot of sort of studies that show, again, increasing your participation in like local translates to increase participation in other elections as well, in future elections. And I also just think it's like also what Scott was saying, ridiculous that like if you're, a 16-year-old, you don't even have a say in voting for your local school board, and like that really affects your day to day, and that seems really unfair to me, and goes against sort of like the basic premises of political representation and participation. So I agree with everything that Scott was saying.
Yeah, I think 16-year-olds should vote. I mean, there's nothing more simple than that. Especially because if you give them the opportunity, right, like Scott said, creates the habitual cycle. I mean, that's just a great thing to have. And most folks, I'll ask, right? Excuse me, my personal friends, I'll ask them, do you know how to vote? Is voting important? They'll say, yes, voting is important, but I don't know how to vote. Most 16-year-olds don't know how to vote. Like, how do I actually register? Where do I go? Is it same day registration? Do I have to do it weeks before? Does it depend on the state I live in? There are just certain logistical practices that if we start at a younger age, it's like teaching the ABCs. The sooner you start, you can probably form a sentence by first grade or something. But yes, I support that. Thank you so much for your input. And kind of on the flip side of that, we're talking about expanding, voting rights. We're also seeing this kind of wave of conservatism kind of strike the country, whereas there are voting rights restrictions being placed on certain minority groups, right? States like Georgia, Texas, I believe there have been 400 anti-voting suppressing bills in many state legislators across the country. And I just want to know, as you work both in college campuses to increase civic engagement, what are your thoughts on this kind of countrywide wave that's kind of trying to restrict it?
Yeah, I mean it's really bad. I think that one of the bedrocks of democracy, I'm not going to say anything new here, is just that every citizen should have the opportunity and right to vote, and we should be constantly trying to figure out how to expand the suffrage. And so the history of this country has been one in which, I mean, when we first established the right to vote, it was just white male landowners, right? And so we've consistently over time, and it should happen faster, but we've consistently offered the opportunity to other people to vote, right? And so that's included women, of course, that included people of color, that included just in 1971 the voting age went from 21 to 18, and so if we were back in the 60s, even with your birthday coming up, you'd have 3 years left to go, and now you actually have some cities, New York City, that's looking at non-documented individuals voting as well. These bills go completely against that, right? So they're trying to make it harder for people to vote rather than easier. That's not what this country has been about, and it's very political in nature. And I think it comes from a place of it comes from a political place of trying to retain power. It comes from a place of being afraid of white people not being in the majority in this country, which will happen in the next 20 to 30 years. There's never been a democracy in the history of the world that survived when you don't have one ethnic group oppressing another ethnic group, or one ethnic group that's sort of not in charge anymore. And so I think that the other thing with this country is it's challenging because we have all these local voting regulations, and how much of that is and can be sort of imposed on the federal level too. And I think we're in a moment in time in where there has to be more federal intervention because you have so many states that are going rogue. And it becomes about power accumulation rather than about making sure that people's voices get heard. And you can couch it in whatever terminology you want, but that's what it is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just like the facts speak for themselves. You can look at voter suppression efforts, and you can look at how they specifically target marginalized communities, and there's no mistaking that. I mean, there's so much data and evidence to support that. It's really interesting how this issue has really become a partisan issue. Like people, it really shouldn't be a partisan issue, but now it is, and that adds like another layer of challenge, especially with organizations and that are supposed to be nonpartisan. That kind of leaves people at like a difficult impasse. How do you tackle these issues? But the evidence is clear, and it's really really disturbing. And I think that, again, like, changes have to happen on the federal level too. But of course, you have a lot of systems in place that are going to potentially block those changes as well. Very frustrating to see, but there are incredible organizations doing work every single day to increase voting rights. And I think, supporting those organizations as best as we can, reaching out to local officials. Obviously, if you're in a state with representatives that want to disenfranchise people, I don't know how successful a letter to them will be, but it's worth trying, and voicing your support in that way. But this is the problem, one of the biggest problems right now, because again, like, this is like the foundation of a lot of other issues as well. Voting is key because it's how we all express and shape other policy. And if you don't have a voice at the table, like you don't have a role in shaping other policy. So this is a big issue that we need to tackle right now. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah. No, and one way to tackle is to run for office. Hint, hint. Anybody on this call who's listening. But no, I completely agree. This story is not new. One could argue we've been dealing with it since the '60s. Sky, you mentioned a couple, prominent dates. We've been dealing with this since Reconstruction. I mean, the list goes on and on. So, yes, voting rights is a great thing, and we should not take them away. That is the end of the story. And I just want to close on this one question that I ask all guests of mine. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Which is, what is your advice? Obviously, the next generation, Gen Z or Gen X, I don't know where they get these terms from. Please, don't come at me with them. But the teenagers, the 16, 17-year-olds, the 18-year-olds, the ones who are going to embark on this journey of dealing with these political crises, how do they make an impact, on elections, on policies, in higher education? Or how do we reach those that feel ignorant or exhausted or alienated? What is kind of your advice from where you stand and what you've seen we can do for this next generation?
The first thing, it's such a great question. The first thing that I'd say is that we really need to listen and pay attention to that last group you were talking about, to people that are really frustrated with the system, right? Because I think you've done some research on and talked to a lot of young people that it's not that they're apathetic, it's just that they're really disillusioned with these systems, that they feel like have made false promises, with systems that they feel like they're being told that change is going to happen. And you see inaction on climate change. You see more economic inequality that we've seen in generations. I mean, the new generation is predicted to not be as well off as their parents. That is not what used to happen in the past. And so people say, why should we vote? Why should we participate in a governmental system that doesn't have our interests at hand? And the other thing that I think is important is, like, I think a lot of young people are getting very creative in their ways of expressing their opinions and expressing their political sentiments, whether it's through things like social media. I mean, I'm not as young as I used to be, and so whenever I engage with young people, I'm teaching a course right now, and they're like, "Oh, we're all going to join a Discord channel," and I had no idea what that is. I mean, I think most, and I'm not on TikTok or stuff like that, which makes me feel old. But it is like,
I'm not on TikTok, so don't feel too bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just assumed that that everybody was. Back in my day, you needed a .edu email address to get on Facebook. But I do think that people are engaging in these different ways. But I guess what I'd say, the way that I think about this is, the more broken our politics is, the more important it is to get political. And so I think the message needs to be to young people: look, we get that you're frustrated, and we get that the systems don't work. And if you want to change them, you have to get involved, because if you don't get involved, the people that have power are going to get more power. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But I guess that's what I'd say, is that we need to meet young people where they are. We need to to demonstrate the importance of getting political, but we also need to recognize why they're so frustrated. And I feel like that sometimes doesn't happen enough, where a lot of older generations will be a little bit paternalistic and like, oh, you need to vote and you need to participate, and why aren't you fulfilling your duty, without recognizing, like, I mean, even something like the pandemic, which has a disproportionate effect on on younger people going to school or not being able to be in school or not being able to, get the most out of high school or college. And so we need to listen to those voices to a greater extent too.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also think that, there are so many ways, like what Scott was saying, there's so many ways to get involved. And I think that sometimes like people think that there's certain like steps you have to take, or, things you have to do that are a lot of times very inaccessible to a lot of people for various reasons. But like there are ways to kind of be creative and stay involved. And I would really urge young people to kind of figure out, in their communities, like what organizing is happening. Because a lot of times a good way to get involved is to kind of survey the space around, and you can see like, do I agree with a lot of the work that's happening? Or if there are gaps, like how can I fill those gaps? It's really important to take initiative and not, just sit back and let things happen, but to take initiative and try to start, brainstorming solutions to what you want to see. And just because you're young does not mean that your voice is any less valuable. In fact, it's probably like more valuable in a lot of ways. And we
I wish
need
I was younger.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like we need fresh, new, creative ideas and energy. And I think that like it is these generations that are going to be unfortunately tasked with solving a lot of the issues that have been left behind for us. But yeah, I think just kind of being creative, surveying the space around you, figuring out, maybe you can join an organization that supports something that you believe in, or you don't agree with the work that the organization is doing. Okay, start your own, work with people, like, and if you don't have the resources to start your own, like there are other ways that you can do that and try to tap into some resources. I mean, I think it's just like about being creative, doing what you can, educating yourself as best as possible within your, limits. And also just not being silent when things aren't how you want them to be, and taking action and taking initiative is really important.
Yeah, yeah, and running for office. Hint, hint. Um, no, that all sounds great. Thank you so much. How can viewers stay updated? This is the only part of the show where you get to promote yourselves. So please shout out your social medias, the research page. I will link everything in the description, so folks can take a view. I believe there's an event happening soon for some outreach, so I'll link that as well if you want to detail that.
Yeah, we're hosting sort of an informational, interactive event on the report on Wednesday, February 2nd at 5:30 Eastern. So register in the show notes, and we're trying to figure out like what do we do as next steps with this report. We know there's a lot of efforts going on that Madison's involved in a lot of them, and so we want to be iterative and helpful, and not be duplicative. And so we are figuring out what that looks like, but would love to get your thoughts on the report and be in more conversation as well.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, yeah, like we really want to hear from people. I think it's all about, starting these dialogues. It's really important. I think it's really important to have a mix of like dialogue, but also action, because a lot of times, people are all talk and no action. So it's really important for us to kind of, work towards action as well, but also keep the conversation open and get as many perspectives as we can in the discussion, and also kind of like understand like what Scott was saying, the great work that is being done and seeing how we can, fit in within that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, no, I thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing the report. I think it's great work that you both are doing and will continue to do. Madison, you're always welcome back again for a third time. It'll be the first time for everything. Scott, thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you. I think people will find these resources invaluable. If you attend any of the universities in the report, please feel free to visit those resources. Like Madison said, tap into them. If not, reach out to Madison if you're a student at Brown, or reach out to Scott. And I'm sure they'd love to help you get involved. But no, thank you so much. Happy New Year-ish. And I wish you both the best of luck.
Thanks so much, and happy early birthday as well, and happy voting age birthday, I guess, for the
Yeah, I should put that on the cake. I
Yeah.
can vote.
yeah.
And thank you for the great work that you do. It's really awesome to see someone, doing this project that you're doing and giving a platform to people doing this work. So you should be really proud of that. And I'm happy to see it. So continue to keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care, guys.
Bye.